It's not that people don't want to own a property. I think the thing that's affecting it is the confidence. People don't know whether they can, and they're not sure how far away this home ownership is to them. And so I think that is why we're seeing more people renting. There is also, I do believe, a new mindset for people that are looking for more of a flexible lifestyle.
This episode is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Hello and welcome to the Investing Insiders podcast, where we help you to achieve financial well-being by making smarter money decisions. I'm Brianne, and in today's episode, we're going to be looking at an age-old debate about whether or not it's better to rent or buy. Joining us today is mortgage expert at the Homeowners Alliance and founder of Mortgage Mum, Sarah Tucker. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Super excited to get into this episode. Obviously, the debate about renting versus buying is picking up a lot of traction at the moment. Looking at home ownership generally, it has long been a milestone for, many, and it's still very aspirational, but the number of renters is rising. So what does this kind of say about the property market and where we're at the moment?
So I think home ownership is absolutely still aspirational. We've got research from Homeowners Alliance that demonstrates that. And it's the proportion of non-homeowners who want to own property rose from 64% in 2025 to 73% in 2026. So it's not that people don't want to own a property. I think the thing that's affecting it is the confidence. People don't know whether they can, and they're not sure how far away this home ownership is to them. And so I think that is why we're seeing more people renting. There is also, I do believe, a new mindset for people that are looking for more of a flexible lifestyle, perhaps wanting to work and travel with more people working from home. And I'm definitely seeing that play out in my clients or aspirational clients as well, who are taking a different approach to life in general. So that might be a little bit of what we're noticing, but I do believe research suggests people absolutely want to own a property. They just don't know how.
So that's really, really interesting. And I think kind of for anybody that's debating the two and thinking about what the benefits are of each, looking at home ownership, what are some of the kind of core advantages of trying to get onto the property ladder?
So the core advantages is security. That's the main reason that people want to own a home, is the stability and security of owning a property yourself, outside of the fact that people do, and like we've said, they find it aspirational, and it's a bit of a success milestone for people, especially in the UK.
Yeah.
More practically, if you own the property, you have more freedom to renovate it, to decorate it. You're building equity with every single day that you live in that property. And there's the potential for the house price to continue growing. So you are building wealth in the background while you own a property. There are obviously negatives as well to owning a home, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
I mean, feel free to, dig into those now.
Yeah, I mean, it's the largest financial commitment you're ever going to have. It's likely to be your mortgage for a long time. You do need to save a deposit most of the time, which I'll come on to later. There are occasions where you don't have to save as much as people think, which I'm hoping to break down today. You do have to keep maintenance. You have to look after it. You have to be responsible for this big asset. So if you do have an opportunity to move abroad or to do something else, you've got that tie, shall we say, in the UK that you need to take advantage of. There are risks that the property price can go down. I've lived through that myself, the period of negative equity quite a few years ago, and that can be quite troubling for people. But yes, it's definitely sort of flexibility over stability, really, is the major argument.
Definitely. I guess that does kind of highlight, quite a core difference between the two. I guess looking more towards the renting side of things, you kind of mentioned this already, the flexibility side, and I suppose being able to have a bit more mobility depending on if you move location or, as you mentioned, traveling or moving abroad. What are some of the other advantages of renting that might, be suitable for somebody looking for that?
I think, like we've talked about, that flexibility, you can relocate easily. And if you are somebody that hasn't necessarily got your roots completely confirmed and you do want to see what it's like to live in different locations across the country, or you can follow your heart or follow your career wherever it takes you, then that rental flexibility is absolutely important. You will have lower upfront costs with renting, and maintenance is generally covered by your landlord. So that is quite good if you want less commitment, if you like, less responsibility. But the drawbacks of that is you're not building equity, you're paying somebody else's mortgage at the end of the day, and they are the ones building equity. You don't have as much control. We have horrible stories of people that are in love with their rental properties, particularly those who are much older and who really don't want to move and don't want to have that, they don't want to have their home taken from them. And ultimately, if your landlord wants to sell, then they might, and that's something you can't control. So there's less long-term security. And of course, you can't control how much rent you're paying. It's not up to you to decide what that monthly amount looks like. When you buy a property, as much as you're governed by the interest rates and the mortgage market, you do still have an element of say, and you can still feel empowered to make a decision. But the phrase I hear a lot of people say when they're renting and it goes wrong is that they feel powerless, and nobody wants to feel like that. People are looking for, now more than ever, people are looking for certainty as much as we can in such an uncertain world, and renting can take away that feeling of certainty.
Absolutely. I think there's obviously lots of stories. Some people have really great situations with their landlords and estate agents, but there's often times where it feels like you're always trying to get something fixed, or you've sent a lot of emails and you just get lost in that cycle of when will this get done? Whereas I suppose when you're in charge of it, it's, up to you to kind of make all those moves.
Absolutely. And it's also about the relationship you have with your landlord as well. But as we've seen, we'll talk about it later, there's things that come into play for landlords that are out of their control too. The Renters' Rights Act has created a huge shift for landlords in what they're responsible for and what they have to think about. So there are things out of their control too. Mortgage rates going up means they've got to be reactive. But having a good relationship with your landlord makes a huge difference if you're renting.
For sure. I guess digging a bit into the misconceptions about home ownership and renting, let's start with home ownership at first. One thing that you mentioned before, which I think will be great to dig into, is the jump from the aspiration to getting the home. What are some of the misconceptions about that bridge that people often have?
Yeah, I think it's really sad to know that from the research I mentioned earlier, 52% of people who want to own a property doubt that they will ever achieve it. That makes me so sad. So I'm hoping that my answers today is going to hopefully turn a few of those around. But I think the biggest thing is people believe they need a much bigger deposit than they actually do in the market right now. So the biggest misconception is that they're reading headlines. They're not necessarily having one-to-one advice because they don't believe they can get a mortgage and they don't want to waste anyone's time. And perhaps they've got some bad credit in the background. And all of these things combined with the messaging that is so often out there makes people believe that it's not possible for them. So first of all, today, if you are listening and you're somebody that wants to own a property or one of these people that would love to, you should absolutely get advice before you're ready to get a mortgage, which surprises a lot of people when I say this, because it's like, I think they think it's like going into hairdressers and saying, I'm not going to get my hair cut with you for about 5 years, but if I did, what would you do to my hair? And of course, if that happened, there's many, many services out there that would be like, you are a time waster. I don't know, why are you wasting my time? Whereas mortgage advisors is very different. We know we've got to work with people for a long time. We know you're not taught things at school. We know that it's a minefield out there and there's not one definite source of information, though podcasts like this really do help. So we do want to talk to you before, because especially if you're self-employed, there's things you can be doing years before you buy a home that's going to really help you later on. And if nothing else, you can make a plan, and that gives you direction when it comes to your career choices, how much you're going to pay in rent. Do I want to move out of my mum and dad's house? If actually I stay here a bit longer and could save a little bit, not as much as I thought, perhaps I can stomach the lack of freedom I feel living in this home. So it's about giving people the real picture. There are 100% mortgages out there. If you are someone that thinks you're too old, there are 100% mortgages for 60-year-olds out there that we have recently placed and has changed lives for people who never thought that they would ever own a property. There are 95% mortgages out there, which means you need to save 5%. There are mortgages where you need £5,000 that you've saved and a mortgage will supplement the rest. And that's from one of the biggest lenders on the market, Lloyds, TSB. So there's lots of products out there. There's also products that if you are renting now and you've been renting for the last 12 of the last 18 months, they will use that as your deposit. That's a product by Skipton. So there are things out there that people don't know about. And this is why I take it on as my personal responsibility to try and broadcast this information, because it's out there, but it depends what people's filters are. And as we know, if we have a certain mindset, the world will show us and filter information based on what we already believe to be true. If home ownership isn't possible, you're going to see the headlines before you see my social media saying, hello, look at this product. So it's just about challenging the messaging as well and making sure people do get advice early on, one-to-one with a qualified advisor, and actually find out what home ownership might look like for them and what decisions they might need to make for that to become a reality for them.
That is fascinating. I think a lot of the things that you've touched on there do not make the headlines. It's not things that you often hear about. I mean, 100% mortgages, they had a bit of a heyday a while ago, but, kind of just went off the radar, I think, during the early stages of the pandemic. So in looking for somebody to speak to about these, trying to find yourself a broker, what steps do you need to take to make sure that, find somebody that's, right for your circumstances, even if you're just going to go to, chat about things before making a move? What are some of the steps you can take to find somebody that's going to be right for you?
It's a good question. I think that there's a heavily saturated broker market out there, and a lot of them are on social media. A lot of them, if you Google advisors in your area, you're going to find them. I think it's all about, like anything, that relationship building. So if you speak to somebody, and I can't say that you're not going to call an advisor and they're not going to make you feel like they're not valuing your time and not making you feel like it's okay to have that conversation. So you've got to trust your gut, go into it with confidence. If they don't make you feel comfortable to have a conversation about home ownership in a few years, they are not the right advisor for you. But do not think that means you can't have another conversation with someone else who will absolutely change everything for you, because they're out there. So it's probably about trusting the people around you that can recommend people to you. Recommendation is always a really solid start. If somebody's used somebody, they're brilliant. But also, if you're listening to this podcast, you're obviously curious to find information yourself, and it's out there. So whether that's, reading blogs online to get your information up, whether that's speaking to AI, which I know you will. I know you're already probably speaking to ChatGPT about owning a property, and that's fine. But please do back that up with speaking to an advisor, because not everything the lovely ChatGPT says is 100% accurate. And we know what's going on every single day in the market. So there's not a definitive answer there to say exactly how to find them, because there's multiple ways. There's so many advisors in the UK, but it's about finding the right one that you have that connection with and that you trust. And whether that's through reviews, recommendation, or just your gut feeling when you speak to them and the relationship you build, that's enough.
That's a really, really good point. Thinking about the trust element and tapping into your own network to see if anybody has recommendations, because, if it's worked well for somebody close to you, the chances are it might work for you as well. But obviously, decide when you speak to them. Are there any red flags to look out for if you are looking online and you're looking at different profiles, or when you are speaking to somebody, are there any things that might signal, okay, this might not be the right person to, take you on this journey?
I think making sure you're speaking to a qualified advisor, firstly. You might assume that I don't need to say that, but there's a lot of finance influencers online at the moment. And whilst I champion that because education is key, you have to make sure who you're listening to actually has the qualifications and the experience to talk about what they're talking about. So do make sure that that's the case, that they're registered with the FCA. They should have the banners on their website. So take a look. You should be able to scroll right to the bottom and see who they're regulated by, and make sure that they are FCA regulated and that they've given you their privacy notice that tells you. I know it's very boring, but this is the biggest financial decision you're going to make in your life. So it's making sure you do your due diligence. But if they're part of a reputable brand that you've heard of, that's always good, because you can trust that brand. And that's the power of personal branding and making brands that people know, like, and trust. And there's plenty out there that I can't obviously advertise on here, I'm sure, but there's plenty out there that you should have heard of, should recognize. In terms of red flags, I personally think it's a red flag if somebody says they're going to call you in X time or come back to you and they don't. Believe who someone is the first time. And that's generally how they're going to work with you. The priority, you should be a priority even if you're not a priority. You should be given the right timescales from the beginning and given realistic expectations of what they're going to do to help.
This episode of the Investing Insiders podcast is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Saxo provides access to a broad range of global assets through a sophisticated trading platform. You can trade US stocks from as little as $1 per trade and UK stocks from $3 per trade. Please remember that all investing involves risk. The value of your investments can go down as well as up, and you could get back less than you invest. Terms and conditions apply. Visit Saxo Markets to learn more. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but for anybody that thinks, okay, do I need to prepare anything before I speak to a broker? Is that the case? Or can you just make the call and let them lead the discussion and ask the questions that they need to know the answers for?
It's a good question. You absolutely can prepare if you'd like, but an advisor will guide you through the process and talk you through it. If you do want some tips, what they're going to want to know is how much you earn, how you earn your money, and whether there's any anomalies there. So whether you've got benefits or child maintenance, whether you get bonuses, whether you have overtime. So there will be questions around your income to be expected. They will want to know what your monthly budgeting looks like when you move out of a property. And that might be something you've never even thought about. And if that's the case, let them guide you through, and they will talk you through. You're going to pay something called council tax. You're going to pay something called water. So they will meet you where you are, whether that is, I'm a complete beginner, I don't know anything, or whether that's, I do my own research online. I just want to check what I know to be true and have an educated discussion with you. So an advisor will match you and meet you there. And if they don't, once again, that's your red flag to go, I don't know if this is the right person for me. And also, if they're explaining things to you and you don't understand, don't pretend that you do. Just say, I don't understand what you're saying. And again, if you're repeatedly not understanding how they explain things, there's people out there that will break it down that's completely right for you. So do find that right person, because that will make your process so much easier.
Definitely. There's nothing more overwhelming than when you have a lot of jargon and big terms thrown at you, which could be explained much more simply.
Yeah, and it's horrible, isn't it? I've had that feeling many times when I was younger, where you just pretend that you understand.
Just
and that's why,
nod.
You smile and nod, and then you go home and probably, now you can look up on AI. What do they mean by that? But it shouldn't be like that. And that's one of the reasons I do what I do, is to try and bridge that gap for people and make it really normal and easy to understand. And if you're not quite getting it, trying again in a different way, because you're going to feel so much more empowered if you understand the decisions you're making around this.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned before, it's one of the biggest purchases you're likely to make in your lifetime. So having that guidance and just making sure that you're sure about the process is such a big thing to get in place. When thinking about, I suppose, home ownership and just general living lifestyles and things like that, there is the debate about whether your home is, the place that you live, or if it's more of an investment. Is there kind of a guiding principle of how you should view your property when you're buying it? So when you're looking at your home, should it be, okay, I want a place to live and I want to own it. This is, good enough. I'm going to hop in here. Or do you need to think about it more long term, as in, can you add an extension, increase the value? What happens after later down the line?
I think it's a combination, if I'm honest. I am someone that's heart-led when it comes to property, and I do believe 90% of my clients walk into their home and get that feeling first.
Yeah.
They know they can afford it. They've done a decision in principle beforehand. They've looked into what they can afford. So they're not viewing properties that they can't actually get. But 9 times out of 10, people will make a decision about home from their heart. That being said, there are people out there who will want to see it as an investment. And it's important to look at the practicalities around the home. You know, like you said, am I going to stay here long term? Can I extend it if we do have 1 children, 2 children, 3 children? Would I want to move again in the future? Has the schools around this, if we do have children, are we happy with the area, the school catchment? And these are the practical decisions that should be made around a home. It is going to be your largest financial asset. It can absolutely provide you with equity, retirement options, and protection from renting in later life when it's harder for you to have that flexibility. But primarily, I think it's about finding a home for most people. And the decision should be made around how does that home fit into your life and your heart before how much is it going to grow and make money. There will be people listening to this, though, that will think, no, I leave my heart behind. I make a practical decision. And that's fine too. But most people, there will be an element of both.
It's a really interesting point. I think you do have to see yourself there and see the life that could unfold whilst you're living there as well. And that's such an important aspect of it, because the home buying process, sometimes it's not as smooth as we'd like it to be. So having that, by the time I get there, it's going to be fine, you know, is like a really nice North Star, I think, just to keep you going and keep you sane during the process.
Absolutely agree.
When thinking about home buying versus renting, what are some of the signposts that might signal somebody's ready to buy, even if, you know, things might not feel as secure? Like, what are some of the signs that they are, ready to start that process?
I think probably that they know where they want to live. So they're building a life, perhaps building that community, and they know this is where I want to be. This is where my job is. Like I've just said, this is where I want to raise my children if I'm having children. So I think knowing the location is important because you're kind of putting your stick in the sand and committing to that. Of course, there are things you can do if you decide later on there, you can rent out your property and there's things you can do. But if you're buying somewhere to live, you should absolutely be thinking, I know where I want to live. I think having that stability in your job and your career as well, not having that kind of desire to travel or to take opportunities that will take you away from the home. These are probably the main signs. And I don't know what happens, but as we grow up, we just want to lay down our roots somewhere. And I think that's something that happens. For me, it happened as I got older. I was fairly young in comparison to today's first-time buyers, but that was purely market-driven. But I just felt like I wanted to lay my roots somewhere and experience a different lifestyle. My priorities shifted. So I think for a lot of people, it can be that. It can be, being in a relationship, falling in love, thinking about settling down, thinking about starting a family. These are the sorts of triggers that often come with wanting to buy a home. We do see, obviously, we know the average age of the first-time buyer now is 34 at the moment. And if I compare myself, when I bought property to what I was doing at 34, I bought property at 23. And by 34, I had 2 of my 3 children, was married. So that feels so much later for me, which is why I really champion trying to make some changes in the industry to make it younger for people. But that being said, my lifestyle is probably very different to other people's in that I was settled very young as well. Ultimately, I think it's a very personal decision and probably one that you should trust your own gut on, and there will be different reasons for everybody.
Definitely. And I think one thing that can sometimes happen, particularly with social media, it can be a great space to find community and get inspiration. How can you avoid the comparison trap? Because obviously everybody leads completely different lifestyles. Everybody started in very different places as well. So what are some of the things that can help people stay on track for what is best for them and not get, lost in that comparison trap?
Oh, do you know, if I had the best answer for that, I think I'd be rich. I always talk to my children about the 3 C's: comparing, criticizing, and complaining, and how they are such common human traits, absolutely triggered by social media as well, becoming bigger because of social media. But they are the 3 things that never, ever serve us. Yet you try telling our human brains continuously not to do that, they will keep leaning there, especially when you're vulnerable. And buying a property, money, these are things that really bring up our vulnerabilities as human beings. So I think, firstly, acknowledging that you are human and this is part of being a human, and you are probably feeling some sort of vulnerability around financially where you are, where you want to be, and that stability that a home gives you. All of this is transferable. That's why it's so strange when we talk about money and property, because it's so wrapped up in our own heart and belief system and filters. My advice for you would be to not trust everything you see either on social media. I know people that hire Airbnbs to demonstrate a certain life on social media. You can take 1,000 photos of a property in one day and it will cost you a couple of £100 to hire something for a day that will give you content for a year. So firstly, be careful who you're comparing it to. Secondly, these home accounts, I love them. Obviously, I love them. But they can be corners of properties, and there could be a world of stuff happening outside of that. So perception, part of the art of social media is perception and kind of the feelings that brings up. If it inspires you, absolutely great. Use it to Mrs. Hinch your home. But if it's having the negative effect, I think it's about focusing on what having a home means for you and coming back to pen and paper and saying, what am I most excited about feeling in this home? And sometimes the surface of what we see is one element of what we want. And I love beautiful things. So I absolutely think about those things. But what I always am encouraged to do is think about, what am I going to do when I'm in that home? So I want to bake. So I used to say, I want to have a cake stand on the side. And I was challenged to say, why? I'm like, because they look nice. It just gives me a feeling of I'm home. This is a really nice, safe place to be. And then I realized it was the baking that actually makes the cake stand feel like that. And it's the feeling. So I think really drilling down on what is it, the feeling that you want to get from your home, and how can you achieve that with the budget you've got, rather than what's it going to look like and how am I going to present it on social media? But it's easier said than done. It is easier said than done.
It is. And I absolutely love that tip. I think it's, there's a fine line between the inspiration and comparison side of things. So once you get really clear about what it is you want from your home, whether you're renting or buying, just be very clear on it. And that more than likely will guide you to the right place and kind of keep away that comparison. Oh, I'm not doing this, or I should be here, or, whatever.
Yeah, we're all in different seasons at different times. And, you just don't know who you're comparing it to. And you're right. Everything you just said is spot on.
So I guess looking more towards the renting side of things now, we've, touched on it a little bit in terms of flexibility. You might not be ready to settle down, or you might not know where you want to settle down. What are some of the other signposts that might, signal renting is right for somebody in this moment?
I think that flexibility, and I think a lot of people say that renting is wasted money. And I don't think that's right, because it's actually about how it fits into everything, your whole picture. And buying isn't automatically the cheapest option. You're not guaranteed to make money. Prices can fall. If you don't own a property for long enough, it can be expensive. You've got stamp duty. You've got people that have bought leasehold flats that have issues with their lease, and it ends up costing them a lot of money in service charges. So there are lots of things to buying that renting can protect you from. There's no interest, for example, maintenance, insurance, transaction costs. So I don't think it's fair to sort of categorize that renting is wasted money. I think if your job is uncertain, if your relationship is uncertain, if your location is uncertain and you're likely to need to move again within the next few years, if you don't have a lot of savings behind you and you think that you're really going to stretch and you won't have a buffer for any emergency repairs if you are buying, there's a sort of sense that you should need to stretch, but overstretching is going to be problematic. So if you're at that point, renting might be better. And it might be that you can live in a property if you're renting that you wouldn't be able to afford to buy. And if that's a period of your life where you think, I really want to live in the type of home I want to live in, and I can't buy anything like that, especially if you're living in areas such as London, for example, then actually you can have an experience and a lifestyle that is much more in line with who you are and who you want to be and the environment you want to live in than you could if you were really set on buying. So renting is absolutely the right option for many, many people. It's not an easy debate, to be truthful. And I think, as I said at the beginning of the episode, we're seeing so much more people value flexibility as well, and so much more career flexibility as well, that it is definitely encouraging renting as a lifestyle choice.
For sure. I think seeing how much the job market has changed even over the last 10 years, and everybody, well, a lot of people now have more of a portfolio career, so they might move around a bit more frequently, and the link between that and wanting a bit more flexibility in terms of housing, is quite apparent. I think one of the things that you touched on, which is really, really important, is the idea of affordability and how that shows up for renters and buyers. So looking on the buying side of things, trying to get a, house deposit together for a mortgage can sometimes feel like a really big barrier for first-time buyers. Are there any tips that can kind of help people who are looking to put something together, just make sure they stay on the right track, and any accounts or tax reliefs that they can take advantage of during the house buying process to make it a bit cheaper?
Absolutely. Something that I always recommend is opening a lifetime ISA.
Yeah.
If possible, as young as possible. The lifetime ISA at the moment is for 18 to 39-year-olds. But the government have recently announced a new first-time buyer ISA, which is going to replace the lifetime ISA in April 2028. There's a consultation that they're looking at now. But the lifetime ISA in its current form allows you to save up to £4,000 a year, and the government will top it up with a 25% bonus. In the new first-time buyer ISA, this will be done when you withdraw the money to buy a property. At the moment, it's paid up front, and the money must be used to buy a property or for retirement. The new ISA will be just to buy a property if you're a first-time buyer. There is a property price cap there, though. So depending on where you live, I would just be mindful that that cap is 450,000. And if it's over that, then there are penalties for you that can make it not worthwhile to use that. The reason I say to open it when you're 18, you can open it with as little as £1, but because you have to have it open for a year before you can use it, you at least have that there ready. And if it can top that up later on, get your government bonus, you've already had the 12 months open. So that is something that's really useful. And especially if you are somebody that's older, that age limit lifting will be really helpful. So that can help. And even the mindset of that helps, because you've opened a space for your future property. And whenever you put money into that, you know that you're contributing and that the government are topping that up. So I think there's a psychological aspect to that as well, where you are seeing that you're saving for a property. And obviously you're getting a good amount back. In general, starting small is always the right way to go with saving. And not being disillusioned into thinking you need £60,000 to get on the property ladder. We've got 62% of aspiring homeowners think they need at least a 10% deposit, whereas actually there are 5% deposits out there. So coming back to my original advice, which is to get advice initially, is a great starting point. Because imagine someone says to you, you need to save £5,000. And you say to yourself, do you know what? I'm going to open my lifetime ISA and I'm going to say £5,000, and I know I've got to have it for at least a year. And perhaps that's your 2-year plan. And that feels good. Divide that by 24 months, tick, tick, and we feel like we're doing it and that this is going to be possible for us. So getting your goal in mind is the starting point, and then starting small. Now, financial discipline does come into this, because once you decide to start saving for a deposit, there might be some things that you need to cut back on to make that happen, such as, for me, it's a matcha latte right now, and that adds up very quickly. So there might be some lifestyle changes for you to make that possible. But coming back to what we spoke about earlier, about thinking about what you want to feel, what you're going to do when you own that property, how important it is to you, then hopefully it will make those small micro decisions a lot easier to handle, and know that you're working towards something that really excites you.
And for people who might be thinking about moving onto a new property, is speaking with a broker still an important part of that process, would you say?
Absolutely, because you still need to know how much you can borrow and what your next step looks like and how much you're happy to pay. Often for second steppers, it's about the lifestyle as well, because often they're making a leap up and they have a really good idea of their monthly commitments and how much they can stretch to, even if we tell them they can stretch higher. And I think with what's been happening in the market over the last 5 years alone, we're seeing second steppers are much more reluctant to stretch too far, because market changes can make such a huge difference to their mortgage rate. And we saw so many second steppers taking COVID cheap rates. And when their remortgages come up with their leap up the ladder, they've then felt like this is unachievable for them, and that's created quite a lot of stress. So I think speaking to an advisor allows you to kind of soundboard and say, this is what we're thinking. What do you think? What's the long-term plan? And it's a nice environment to be able to aspirationally talk about what you want to do next. So I would say yes, but obviously you've got a bit more experience if you're a second stepper, and you might want to do a bit of research yourself. And that's absolutely the right thing to do as well. But having a safe place to soundboard is really beneficial.
And say, for example, you are a second stepper. Mm-hmm. Do you need to speak to a different range of mortgage brokers, or could you potentially get in touch with the person who helped you with your first property?
If you are doing your job properly, you should be working with somebody as an advisor for a lifetime. They should be on your WhatsApp. You should have been hearing from them over the last 2 years. So if you had a 2-year fixed rate, you should have had at least a few emails every now and again to say, hi, it's been a year. Has anything changed? Do I need to look at your life insurance? How's everything?
Interesting.
How's it going?
Okay. Yeah.
If you haven't heard from them, maybe you don't have that real relationship that's going to last a lifetime. But as far as I'm concerned, you should have them on WhatsApp, and you should be able to ping them a message and say, I'm thinking of moving. Can we have a chat? Oh, yeah. Where are you thinking of moving to? How exciting. Yeah, cool. So let's have a look. Or I want to see if I can afford this place. So you should have had a bit of a dialogue with them, at least some check-ins or some, emails, just making sure everything's good. So I would like to think you would go back to your original advisor, but perhaps you're listening to this thinking, oh, I want an advisor like that. I didn't have that experience the first time. So if that's the case, definitely find yourself the right person, and hopefully they'll be the ones to stay with you a long time.
That's a really good thing to keep in mind. So kind of pivoting back to renters, we touched on it earlier, the Renters' Rights Act, which came in this year, it has offered renters a lot more in terms of security. Does that change the kind of position of renting in comparison to home ownership?
I think it's certainly provided those who are renting, like you say, with some assurances. We did have some horror stories of landlords not looking after properties, people living in properties they should never have been able to live in, and not being able to get them fixed and not being able to get them to a satisfactory standard. And that's with children living in these properties. So the Renters' Rights Act absolutely had to happen to make sure we were protecting those tenants out there who were powerless to landlords who weren't doing the right thing. This is definitely in favour of tenants ultimately, making sure that your rent can't just be increased. making sure you don't have to tie yourself in for a period, which some people liked, but some people didn't like that. And so now you won't sign a 6-month or a 12-month lease. You can't unreasonably refuse pets. So for people that are animal lovers, if it's reasonable and it's suitable with the property. So these things that we spoke about, this inflexibility, this lack of control, this building a relationship with your landlord may become less important as time goes on, because a lot of this protection is in place and there is going to be further enhancements. So there will be a landlord database and an ombudsman, which will enhance the protection for renters. So I think people should be comforted by the Renters' Rights Act. It's meant a lot more work for landlords, but it's for the right reasons overall.
Yeah. And I guess looking a bit further afield, how do you kind of see the balance between home ownership and renting continuing in the UK?
I think the aspiration's still going to be there, and I think it will remain high. I hope that the age of first-time buyers doesn't continue rising, but I think until we fix the current issue with affordability and until we can really drive the belief in home ownership and still do more to support people, I don't want to see that get older. I don't want to see that age go up. I want to see the age go down. But that could happen depending on how quickly we can make changes happen. I think the deposit requirements for home ownership could really change things if we can look at that for people. Mortgage rates, obviously. Housing supply is the biggest thing. So I think making sure there are enough houses, but some of those will go to the rental market anyway. In terms of renting, there are some people who do believe that there will be less rental properties because some landlords will exit the market because of the additional pressures on them. And that's before we talk about the EPC ratings and the energy pressures on some landlords to fix properties by a certain date. However, what we're noticing is the landlords that exit, those same properties are being bought by other landlords or other companies who will rent them out still. So that's an argument that has different sides to it, but I don't personally believe we'll lose lots of rental properties based on the data that we're seeing. It will be interesting though to see whether people's mindset shifts. And I think people will still want to own property. As we know, aspiration is high, but I think what people value right now still with certainty, but that could change as time goes on. People might start to value flexibility more. So it really depends on kind of the consumer attitude, I think, to property in general. But certainly from the data we're seeing, aspiration is still going up.
Absolutely. And for any prospective homeowners out there, what is, one kind of home buying tip that you wish they all knew?
I have said it already, but I wish you knew that there is a whole industry here to help you, and that is not a transactional relationship, it's a lifelong relationship. And you can absolutely reach out to them today and start to build that relationship, even if you're not ready. So I think I would just encourage you to build relationships with the people who are going to help make this a reality for you, help you at the next purchase, help you when you have a child and you don't know what it means for your mortgage, and they'll be with you at every stage. But also educating yourself is key, and we will do everything we can, in the mortgage industry and in the Homeowners Alliance to keep making that a primary opportunity for people to actually learn and empower themselves with information so that they can keep making good choices for themselves.
Well, Sarah, that is, fantastic guidance. And thank you so much for joining this episode.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining our Investing Insiders podcast. If you liked the episode, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on your platform of choice. For the latest money news and deals, you can sign up to our weekly newsletter at investinginsiders.co.uk/newsletter-page. We've also got a suite of guides, tools, and calculators on our website at investinginsiders.co.uk. You can also keep up to date with us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode.